Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. My name is Alex Peruta, and I am an independent educational consultant out of the Boston area. And thank you again so much for coming and attending this webinar. So I'm going to share my screen with you so we can jump right into the presentation and get started. So just to give you a little bit of my background, I am, as I mentioned, an independent educational consultant out of the Boston area. I have been working in the college admissions field for quite some time. In order to really stay up to date on everything that's happening, I regularly do professional development, and I am part of quite a few professional associations for educational consulting or college consulting specifically. And I give talks rather regularly on the college admissions landscape, as well as educational talks around being a student. And I really thought that we needed a presentation on the topic that I'm about to discuss, which is how can students really utilize the time that they have right now well while they're at home, because there are just so many things going on, so many things we can't control. But part of what we can control as a student is what we do with our time. And I work with a lot of students one-on-one, so I've been getting a lot of questions lately about what they should be doing and what should they be keeping in mind now that things are a little bit different. So to talk a little bit about what's changed as far as college admissions is concerned and as far as education is concerned, at least for the foreseeable future. A lot of students' schools have gone to a pass-fail system for the remainder of the school year. Some for just the last quarter of the year if the school's on the quarter system, some for the second half of the year if the school's on the semester system. And this is definitely a big change for students. Another change that's been implemented is that there's a lot of standardized tests that have been canceled for this spring and the beginning of this summer. So how does this specifically tie into the college admissions process? Well, when a college is reviewing a student's application, when they're, the fall of their or winter of their senior year, when they submit their components, one of the main things that they're looking at for that student is their transcripts. And for a lot of schools, they're looking at their test scores as well. And as far as the transcripts are concerned, now with schools going pass-fail for at least part of the year, there's going to be less grades to look at for a good number of students. And so a lot of admissions officers are going to be looking even more deeply into other components of a student's application to get a sense about them and see if they're going to be a good fit for a school. Additionally, a lot of individuals have asked me about the fact that the standardized tests have been waived, at least temporarily, in some colleges and universities. The first thing that I would say about that is it's actually quite a small percentage of colleges and universities at this point that are going test optional due to the current situation for the next year, and a few of them for the next 2 to 3 years. It is quite a small percentage currently at this point. I like to stress that because I've had families reach out to me to seem to be under the impression that many schools are test optional at this point, but that's not currently the case. And there are certain colleges and universities that have already told us they do not plan to go test optional. So for those schools that do go test optional, and for those students that apply to those schools and maybe apply without test scores, that's again one less metric that a school can use to evaluate that student. So what are they going to do? They're again going to focus in on a lot of the other components of a student's application. And so there's a lot of things we can do around building a student's profile and the components of their application while they're home during this time. So I really want to dive into what students should do. So one thing that I want to touch on before getting into specific tasks that a student should do is what is the same in the review process when colleges are looking at various components of the application. So typically, like we said, they look at their transcripts. They may not be looking at test scores this coming year, depending on the school. They're going to look at a student's activities and resume. They're going to look at a student's teacher recommendations. They're going to look at a student's essays that they write. And they may look at art portfolios or STEM portfolios as well. Those are some of the main components of the application, as well as filling out sort of the basic questions on the common application or the school-specific application itself. So I really like this table from Bucknell University talking about what they're really looking at in the different components of the application and what character attributes they're looking for. A lot of my students are focusing on the numbers in their application, their GPA and their test scores. And although those oftentimes are important, schools are really looking to understand a student's character. And there are specific attributes that they're looking for. And I think Bucknell did a great job at outlining those here. And there's so many things that students can do at home to show these different character attributes. There's things we can do for leadership. There's things you can do for empathy and showing our ability to understand what others are going through and giving back. There's a lot to be said right now about how to be determined, how to have grit. It's very easy to say, well, I can't go to my, lacrosse practice and my med club at school isn't meeting because we're no longer there in person. I'll just focus on my schoolwork. And, online schoolwork is still important, but most of my students have definitely been indicating to me that they don't typically have nearly as much work right now as they would during the normal school year if they were physically in school. So what students do with themselves during this time, how they show that they're pressing on, that they're still engaging even at home, shows resilience, shows determination, shows grit, shows the ability to set goals, right? Also shows the ability to be a really independent individual, which are all fantastic skills for going into college and things that admissions offices want to see. Also, because we're in a unique situation, it's a fantastic time for a student to show their creativity, being creative in what they decide to do and how they put it together. So these are all ways that we can look at these attributes, think about how they connect to things that students can do while they're home, while they're not physically in school, and really strengthen their applications. So when we're thinking about all of those attributes on that previous table, the goal is to really give the admissions office an understanding of who the student is as a person and what they value. And a lot of my students don't think about this necessarily when they start preparing for college admissions or college applications, but it's something that I really stress to them. And these attributes and being able to show schools your character and your values is something you can start building on in your profile as early as 9th grade, potentially even 8th grade. And now is definitely the perfect opportunity to go and seek out opportunities that are a good fit for that student's personality and that really show who they are. So the first category that I want to focus on of things that a student can actually do in this current time is community service. Schools really want to see that students are involved. So community service or community engagement is one of the top things that college admissions officers are looking for. Students can be interested in different areas of study. They can participate in various different activities, academic, athletic, so on and so forth, normally. But the one consistent thing, or one of the consistent things that I see college admissions officers talk about when I visit schools, when I go to conferences, and when I interact with them regularly, is that they want to see that a student is involved in some way, shape, or form in a community. And we recognize that this is so important to them because a lot of schools will ask questions about community service or how a student has really participated in their community on the actual college applications. It's becoming a very common question or potential short essay topic. Why do colleges care so much about community service and community engagement? When they are reading applications, when they are choosing who to accept, they really are trying to build a class of students that are going to come together and be a fantastic group in addition to the school and college's community. And so they feel that if they see a student is engaged in their community at the high school level, whatever community they decide to engage in, that they will bring some of those skills, some of that motivation to the college's campus and also contribute, which is something they really want. They really want students to contribute. They don't want students to necessarily just be spending all of their time in their dorm room outside of their classes. One thing I like to stress about community service and community engagement is what that really means, typically in the eyes of the admissions office. And that's usually somehow helping a group, an organization in need, right? Supporting some sort of cause. So I like to clarify that with students because some of my students will say, oh, I did this thing and I didn't get paid for it, so it's voluntary community service. Well, not everything you do that you do not get paid for is really necessarily community service or a community engagement. Sort of what is the cause behind what you're supporting and what you're doing. The other thing that I like to tell students about community service is it's not something to just check a box for. Okay, I did this, I got my 20 hours I needed this year for school, I'm done. Or, just to do the first thing that they think of as far as a community service activity. I'll have students where we begin to brainstorm what they could be doing for community engagement, and they'll say, well, I can go to the soup kitchen. And although definitely going to the soup kitchen and volunteering is an absolutely worthwhile activity and something to do, oftentimes I think students suggest it because it's the first thing they think of as like a typical community service activity. Ideally, we want to try to find an activity that really ties to a student's profile, right? Why do we want to do that? Because when a student submits materials to colleges, they're trying to tell a story. They're trying to show who they are. They're really trying to create their own brand, right? And so the more cohesive their activities can be that can tie into who they are and their interests across different disciplines really creates a strong story. So for some potential options for volunteering at this point in time, there's a lot of things that can actually be done right from home. So one thing that I suggest is a great idea is to consider online tutoring. So high school and even later middle school students can absolutely do online tutoring for younger students. I think there's a real need for this right now. There's a lot of organizations asking for this almost sort of not quite peer level of tutoring. I will include some of those potential organizations in the resource list that I send out a little bit later. The reason I think that this is a great idea is it allows students to act as mentors. High school students can be tutoring younger students in various subjects. And a lot of those younger students are getting a lot less work from their schools than the middle school or the high school students. A lot more of the work you do at the elementary level is really engaging in the classroom at the time those younger students are working with their teachers and their peers. So they don't tend to be getting quite as much work right now as the older students. And so it'd be great for them to be able to interact and to be mentored in some way by an older student. Another option is if a high school student really feels like they have a skill, something they're particularly good at, they could absolutely offer an online course as far as that's concerned. They could run it through Zoom, they could run it through Skype. If a student is like a fantastic guitar player, they could teach intro guitar over the computer, for example. As far as gathering others to participate in that activity, participate in that class, things like that can be posted, in the school's community board, in the town's community board, potentially on different versions of social media as well to get individuals to come. Another option for virtual volunteering is to be a citizen scientist. And what that is where different members of the community help researchers sift through data that they've collected, data that can't really be thoroughly analyzed by computer programs. So there are different situations with different research projects that are currently going on where researchers have taken a lot of images of different things. And these images oftentimes can't be accurately analyzed by the computer. So they're asking individuals from the community to sift through images to look for different things. Like I know of one research group that's trying to map neurons in the brain. And they give a tutorial at the beginning of the online program showing exactly how you find the neurons, what they look like in the picture, and then asking people to map them because they're developing a full mapping of neurons in a brain, which I think is really cool. So that's definitely something that students could do from home. The other thing to think about is, if you find something that you're working on online in a volunteering capacity that's interesting, potentially reaching out to others to get them involved. So this doesn't have to just be something that you do on your own. If you're going to teach an online class in guitar, maybe you have a friend who plays the bass who could come and join a lesson or two as like a guest teacher or something like that. Or a group of friends could get together to work on a citizen science project virtually, in a Zoom room with 5, 6, 7 other people. Sometimes working in a larger group also helps you stay motivated, and you're working towards a common goal. So then something else to think about as far as community services, like actual community assistance. So there are a lot of individuals right now who are homebound, maybe because they're immunosuppressed or maybe for other reasons that really cannot go outside. And there's plenty of ways that students can help these individuals without ever having, direct contact with them. This could be going to, mow a neighbor's lawn or rake their leaves or something like that. Just to help them in these times. The other thing to think about in helping like the greater community is considering creating solutions to larger problems. I know a lot of people are out there making masks, which I think is great. And this is absolutely something that students can be getting involved in and students can be doing. I saw a student who was posting how they were making masks for much younger kids that are immunosuppressed because a lot of the adult masks are too big for them and they also are somewhat boring. So they were engaging in ways to create sort of fun masks for these younger students so that they would feel a little bit happier about having to wear one. I've also seen groups of students working together who have an interest in engineering and trying to come up with creative solutions for medical professionals. So ventilators are in really high need right now, and there's only so many of them to help with people's breathing who are in the hospital. And there are some students that are testing out prototypes for sort of makeshift ventilators and things like that I've seen, which I think is really amazing. So it's a great time to be creative, especially if you have sort of an interest in engineering. Another option for community assistance is really to do something that we would think of as a little more traditional, which is, gather items from around the house to donate. I've seen a lot of postings lately for homeless shelters and other places really in need of items for these individuals that they're housing, more so than normal. The same thing with food pantries. A lot of people are out of work. There's more food scarcity than normal. So thinking about those types of things as well are great opportunities to help the community. In addition to volunteering at this time in some way, shape, or form, it's also a great time to dive more deeply into academics for students. And I think it's really a great opportunity to embrace online education as something that students engage in. So to talk a little bit about online academics, I think that there's really sort of 3 big reasons as to why students might engage more in online academics outside of their sort of typical online school they're doing right now. One might be to explore a new area of interest. So for example, you may find that you love the biology class that you're taking this year and your teacher touched on for a day the topic of neuroscience and you found it really interesting, but your school doesn't offer a neuroscience elective later on in high school. You could absolutely do an online course or do online research to learn more about neuroscience to see if it's something you want to delve deeper into. Another reason that students might engage in online academics right now is to actually deepen their knowledge for an area they're already involved in. So if you've taken AP chemistry and you really, really enjoyed it, you might be able to take the next level of chemistry. And for some students, that it might even be a little bit of a preview into organic chemistry and what that happens to be about. That is something you can absolutely do online. And the third reason I think students might engage in online academics right now is to preview material for next year. So we're in a pretty odd situation right now where students are learning at home, but the feedback that I'm getting from students as well as teachers and guidance counselors in the school is that the pace that they're going through the curriculum is slower, understandably. And there was a gap there when there was an adjustment period to moving to online learning. And a lot of schools focused initially on just reviewing material that students had already learned in school, as opposed to teaching new curriculum. And so because of that, there is a situation where students are not necessarily going to learn all of the material they would have normally by the end of the school year. And for some classes, that's not as much of a problem as others. The classes that are cumulative, that build on each other, more so math and science, potentially history if you have a sequential history class, this could have an impact for the following school year because we're unsure at this point how schools will deal with the beginning of next school year as far as catching students up. So it's a great time to like strengthen subjects now that students are working on, as well as potentially preview topics for next year to make sure students feel really comfortable with them. And this is a situation where they can absolutely reach out to their teacher to ask, first of all, are there any topics that they would have typically have covered this year that they're not going to get to now? Or, what are some of the fundamental foundational topics they need for, next year's class that they can begin exploring? So, where to go for online learning outside of the normal class that they're taking in school. I think there's a few really good options. So when students are initially exploring a new topic, I think podcasts and YouTube are actually a great resource. There's a lot of people producing podcasts and YouTube videos, in shorter format on a lot of topics or have libraries of podcasts and YouTube videos. And I have students that listen to podcasts or watch videos, and that's where they first start to develop an interest in another academic topic that they didn't even know about before. So I think those are a great place to start. But then if a student knows they really want to continue on with that topic and learn more, there are absolutely online classes. There's really 3 categories of online classes. So the first category is classes not for credit. So these are courses that a student just takes online, like typically just really to learn and to explore. There's also classes you can take where if you complete the work for the class, that might be surveys, that might be quizzes, that could be a project, that the student can get a certificate at the end of the course. 2 great places to go for non-credit and certificate courses are edX and Coursera. Those are 2 online programs. A lot of the material on there is free, and the courses on there are typically often created by colleges and universities or professors in colleges and universities, and they recreate classes that they typically offer at that school. So for example, I've had students take a computer science course through edX that is offered in person at Harvard University. It's their introductory comp sci course. It's very interesting. It's really popular. And so students have been able to preview that through edX before. The third option for online classes is really to take a course for actual undergraduate credit. And this can be done at certain universities as well as a large amount of the community colleges around the country. So why is this something to consider? This is definitely an upper level version of online learning. So that's something that's important for students to recognize. This isn't something to just do on a whim. It's something you really want to think about. It is a great option if you're dedicated to it. One of the reasons is colleges and universities view courses that you take for undergraduate credit as having an extremely high rigor, higher oftentimes than AP courses students take in school. Because these courses for undergraduate credit are taken with other college students, you are showing colleges and universities you have the ability to do the academic work at the college level, which is what a lot of AP courses are attempting to mimic. But taking a class for undergraduate credit really confirms that. It has become more and more important for colleges and universities to see students taking courses for undergraduate credit. We see that because a few years ago on the Common Application, they added a question asking if a student had taken any sort of course at a college or university. They list the course, they list if they got credit for it, and then there's a way to submit the transcript. This is great, specifically in our current situation, because if you're a student who doesn't have actual letter grades for the second half of this year and you're going past fail, taking a course for online credit is something that can basically be added to your profile and give them another way to view your academic abilities and really add to your application at this time. The other thing about courses for undergraduate credit is that they mostly run on the fall, winter, spring, summer schedule. So a lot of ones they're currently being registered for that will start in the summer terms for a lot of the colleges and universities. I will include some options in the follow-up that I send about places I've had students participate in programs for undergraduate credit. There are quite a few that are still taking registrations and will be taking registrations, usually through mid-June, approximately. So something else I want to talk about that students can really do right now and take advantage of is actually doing college research. Granted, this is going to apply more to current sophomores and current juniors, but it's definitely something that freshmen can begin to look into as well. So where can you start as far as college research is concerned? There are a lot of online options now, particularly because colleges and universities recognize that students do not have the opportunity to visit campus. So they have really stepped up their game in the virtual visits department. So the first thing I suggest to students is if they're exploring schools or there's a school they're interested in, to start by requesting information. And that can be found usually by typing in the name of the college or university, then put the phrase request information into Google. It's usually going to be one of the first things that comes up. Make sure, of course, that it says you're requesting information for the undergraduate admissions part of the school, not like the med school or the law school or something else, because that can happen. When you fill out this information, they'll ask you, for your name, your address, and a few things like that. Oftentimes they'll ask you what you think you might want to major in or what you're interested in. And a lot of students panic about this and say, what should I put down? And I tell students, just try to put down your best educated guess about right now what you think you're interested in. They're not going to hold you to this. If this is a school you end up applying to later and on this request information form, you put down you're interested in biology and then you change your mind and when you apply, you want to do chemistry, that's perfectly fine. No one is going to penalize you for that. The reason they're asking that question is because they want to try to send you tailored content based on your interests rather than just sending you everything. So just make your best educated guess as far as that's concerned. One pro tip I will give you about requesting information: you're required to provide an email address because they send most of their material through email to you about the school. Make sure that whatever email address you provide to them is the same email address you're going to use for the entire college application process. So a lot of my students will set up a separate email for that specifically, and that's perfectly fine. Students will ask, can they use their school or personal email? That's not necessarily an issue as long as you don't mind receiving college information regularly, but you do want to, check those emails. The reason I tell you to choose one email and stick with it is certain schools track you, they track your information, and they track your interest in the school. That's really their goal. They want to see how engaged you are with them and how many touch points you make with them over the course of this whole process. And they track that by email. And the reason is that technically people could have the same, first and last name, but email addresses are unique. And if it's a school that tracks that and takes that into consideration in some way, shape, or form in their admissions process down the road, you want to get credit for the different things that you do. So the same with any of these other things on the list that I discussed that you register for, you always want to use the same email. So other things you can do, there are absolutely virtual college visits happening currently. There's a lot of online tours that you can take. There's a company called UVisit that does 3D campus tours and has gone through and basically videotaped many, many colleges and universities in the country. And that's oftentimes posted on the school's website under the admission section under Visit. As well as a lot of them are doing online information sessions currently that you can go in and sign up for and listen to maybe a senior student tour guide speak or maybe someone from admissions talk about the school. Another option, if you feel like you have specific questions, email the admissions office. This is a great option. What I will say about emailing the admissions office is right now they seem to be extremely available. They understand that students can't come to campus, and they've been very, very quick from what I've seen about answering emails. Students sometimes worry about, well, what am I going to email the admissions office about? Well, if you have a question about a specific major or a particular program at the school, you can absolutely email and ask about it. Another tip as far as emailing the admissions office: at most colleges and universities, there are a set of individuals in the admissions office known as regional admissions officers. So there is someone known as a regional admissions officer that's assigned to review applications from the zip code associated with your high school and probably some of the other zip codes in the area. So for example, if a student was in a particular town, there's going to be a regional admissions officer that reads the applications for that town and probably the surrounding towns as well. Based on where your school is, not the town you necessarily live in, because sometimes that can definitely be different. You can usually find out who this regional admissions officer is by going to the school's website. If you can't find it there, you can reach out to the admissions office about it. I'm pointing this out because I think it's best to email that person with your questions. You would rather form somewhat of a relationship with them or have them answer your inquiry because they are a person that's usually a guaranteed read of your application should you apply down the road. Something else you can do to research schools is look at social media accounts. So I was at a presentation recently with the director of admissions for Georgia Tech and was having a conversation about prospective students connecting with colleges and universities. And he made a really good point, which is to check out the social media for a school that isn't run specifically by the admissions office or the school itself. So this would be social media put on by like student clubs or organizations or parent groups or something like that to give you like a true sense and better feel about the school, not from the school itself. Another opportunity you have is a lot of schools are posting ways for you to speak with current students, either by email or by having a short video chat. This is a great opportunity to see a student's perspective because that's quite important and can be very different from the perspective that you get from other staff and administration that work on campus. And finally, another way to really get to understand a school, but also to show a school what you're all about is to do an interview. And more schools are adding online interviews. This particular item at the bottom, I would say something to do when you feel more confident that you're strongly interested in a school. Interviews are something you absolutely want to prepare for. I do mock interviews and interview prep with my students before they actually conduct an interview. So that's something to consider. You want to make sure you've thoroughly researched the school and maybe go through some of those questions or have someone ask you those questions and prepare responses ahead of time. Common interview questions are, why do you want to attend this school? I know in a lot of recent interviews, my students have been asked, like, how are you handling the current situation? And all of these things we were talking about that you can engage in are fantastic ways to, show them that you're doing something with your time right now. So something else I do want to talk about, for certain students, it's actually a good time also to work on components of their college applications. And there are certain components of the application that you can work on much before your junior year. So the things you can focus on doing right now as far as actual college application. One is an activity list and a resume. So on the majority of college applications, when you apply, they will ask you to list your activities. But not only will they ask you for the name of your activity, they'll ask you for the title. What was your position in the activity? Were you the vice president of something? Were you the founder of something? Were you a participant in a summer program? They'll also ask you about the number of weeks you do that activity in a year and the number of hours per week that you participate in it. That's a lot of detailed information, and families and students are often really surprised by that, but that is something that comes up specifically on the Common Application and on other application systems as well. And so I find that the earlier you can start making a list of your activities and anything notable in them that you've done, as well as how much time you're devoting to them, it makes it much easier when you go and formally fill out this part of the application later on. You could just start a spreadsheet for now with the information. And it's much easier to remember in the moment when you're doing the activity than 2 years later when you're filling out this application if you're a 9th and 10th grade student right now. A resume is also a fantastic thing to begin working on. The resume is sort of taking your activity list and diving deeper, discussing for each activity what you've done in the activity, as well as what you've learned from doing the activity. This is really important to colleges and universities. They fully recognize that you may not do the exact same extracurricular when you get to their campus, but they want to understand what you've learned from the activities that you are currently doing that will translate to their campus and to being a part of their community. And so there are a lot of what we call soft skills that do transfer from one activity to the next. Maybe that's teamwork, collaboration, public speaking, things like that. These are all things to highlight in a resume. Starting a resume early is a great idea also because not only can you use it for the actual college application, you can use it earlier than that. You can use it if you're applying for an internship or potentially a job or a summer program that you want to participate in. Some of them require resumes, some of them it's optional, but it's fantastic to be able to submit that extra piece. It helps you stand out even more. Another thing that students can work on is potentially a LinkedIn profile. So LinkedIn is like a professional social sort of networking platform. There is an age minimum for LinkedIn, but you can work on it. It is something that I do have students do. I find that it's a good way to visually show some of the things that you've been working on, as well as some of the activities that you participated. So you can use your activity list as a basis of what you put in your LinkedIn. But LinkedIn also gives you the option to follow certain groups and show interest in different areas and topics. So it allows a college or university to learn a little bit more about you beyond your standard activity list. And it also shows that, if you're sort of very organized and very professional, which is great as well. A third thing that students can really start working on early as far as the actual college application components are portfolios. So depending on what a student's area of interest is, there are different types of portfolios. I think more people tend to be familiar with art portfolios. So students that are interested in visual art or performing art oftentimes have to gather together material to submit to schools. And that is something that creating that takes a significant amount of time. I strongly suggest that students who have some interest in some form of art, whether it's visual or performing art, to make sure that they are in contact with a professional or an expert, someone that can really clarify for them for what they're interested in studying, what exactly needs to go in their portfolio. And the reason I stress that so much is just because you do not want to be in a situation where you spend hours and hours working on your portfolio and then find out some of the things you did are not things you needed to do, or you're missing things, just because art in general can be very, very time consuming. So this is a great time. Now you could have an art teacher at school who maybe teaches AP Studio Art who could advise you on this. You could seek an outside counselor potentially. But art portfolios are something you can absolutely start early and be working on now. There are other types of portfolios. So I also mentioned on this slide STEM portfolios. So I have students that are particularly interested sometimes in STEM. Part of my background is in STEM. I used to be a scientific researcher and I have undergrad degrees in biology and chemistry. And so I have sort of a different type of keen insight into STEM work. So I oftentimes work with students on creating portfolios to showcase the different things they've done in their STEM activities. The types of things that go into that portfolio could be abstracts from research papers that they've put together, or from poster presentations they've done at conferences, or a list of their STEM courses, things like that. And again, these types of things take time, and it's absolutely something students can begin working early on. Now, there's a few things that specifically I'd say juniors can be working on just for a second that I want to touch on. And those two things are essays and teacher recommendations. For students that are current juniors, it's absolutely a time they can begin working on their main essay. You do not need to have your school list and all finalized to work on any of the components on this slide, but definitely not to work on your main essay. I say that because I get that question a lot too, but I don't have my list finalized yet. Should I be working on my main essay? Yes, your main essay is about who you are as a person, about your character and your values, and it's going to be sent pretty much to any school you apply to, except for a few rare exceptions. In addition to that, I wrote down supplemental essays here. Supplemental essays are typically shorter essays that are specific questions asked by colleges and universities individually. They get to choose what these questions are. But there are certain supplemental essay topics that are very, very common about leadership and talking about a time you showed leadership. There's ones asking about a time that you were a part of a community and how did you influence that community. There's oftentimes a question asking you to discuss one of your activities. And there's also oftentimes a question that asks you to talk about an academic interest. these 4 are some of the most common supplemental essay topics, and those are something you can draft and begin to work on and then apply them to the different schools when you finalize your list and you see their exact questions. But you can definitely brainstorm and have a starting point with those topics. The other thing I say to juniors that's really important to keep in mind is now is the time of year for teacher recommendations. And you might think, well, like, what do I have to work on as far as teacher recommendations are concerned? There's actually a good amount of work I ask my students to do before even asking their teachers for recommendations, or shortly after if they've already asked. Teacher recommendations are extremely important in the college application process. Admissions offices do look at them in most cases. There's very few schools that don't allow them or don't require them. And it really gives the admissions office an insight to who you are as a student, which is an important component of who you will be on their college campus. And teachers tend to know our students well in the classroom. Sometimes they may know the students outside the classroom if they're also a coach for a sport or maybe an advisor for a club, but that's not always the case. So I strongly advise my students to create a teacher recommendation packet to provide to their teachers after they ask them to write the recommendation and, if the teacher agrees to do so. And I absolutely include the resume in that packet. I have students include a reflection on their time in the class with that particular teacher, and then whatever else the teacher specifically asks for. So certain teachers will ask students to submit a graded essay or something else. But preparing that material, having the resume ready, doing a reflection on their time in the class is something they can absolutely do now. And I really strongly suggest students to ask teachers for recommendations, no later than mid-May. Always check with your school about their specific requirements for asking teachers. Some of them have rules around that, but generally speaking, I would say by mid-May, if not sooner, you definitely want to have asked teachers if you are a junior. Okay, so the last thing that I really want to touch on that students can be working on at this time when they're home, especially to really get ahead and get an edge in the college admissions process, is leadership. Leadership is extremely important to college admissions offices. So why is leadership so important? Leadership is important because, again, if you show the characteristics of a leader, and there are many, many different characteristics and there are many ways to be a leader, if you show those to the admissions office, they feel like you're really going to help contribute to their community. You're going to organize things, right? You're going to help the community grow. And that's really important. I oftentimes, when I talk to college admissions officers, when I visit campuses every year, again, when I go to conferences, I keep finding the same scenario arises. So when talking to certain admissions officers, for example, they'll say, yeah, we had 10,000 applicants this year, and we felt 5,000 of those students could really thrive in our institution academically, extracurricularly, socially, right? I'm like, okay, that's great, half of the students. And they'll say, yeah, but we only accepted 2,000 or 3,000 students. And, that's understandable. They only have so much room. But I always tend to follow up with the question, well, you said 5,000 of the 10,000 students could thrive here, but you're only taking 2,000 or 3,000 of them. In some cases, that's less than half of the students that you feel could thrive. How are you making that decision? How are you narrowing down those groups of students? And among their responses, it varies a little bit from school to school. There are 2 or 3 common things that they mentioned, and one of them is very consistently leadership, looking for different forms of leadership as one way that they can distinguish students. And so that's why I think honing in on a student's leadership skills is really important. And it's something students can begin working on as early as 8th or 9th grade and continue to cultivate through their time in high school. And so what colleges and universities have communicated is that, there's really 5 areas that they sort of look for leadership in typically, right? So there's leadership in the community. Maybe that's through community service and volunteering. There's leadership in academics. That could be something like, peer tutoring, or that could be something like being part of the National Honor Society. There's leadership in school, maybe part of student government or the head of a club or something like that. And then there's also leadership in athletics, sports, and potentially outside interests, other extracurricular activities that a student might be engaged in. Right? These are the most common categories that they're looking at. And having leadership in at least one of these, if not more than one of these, is really a good way to stand out in the college application process. So, what's one of the best ways to show leadership to a college admissions office? I think one of the best ways to do that is through a leadership project. So, to explain what a leadership project is and why it matters. In the eyes of the admissions office, typically there's 3 tiers of leadership. Sort of the base tier tends to be if a student is the assisting member in some sort of pre-established club or organization. So maybe they're the manager of a team, or they're the vice president of something along those lines. That's sort of the base tier of leadership. The middle level tier of leadership is when a student is the head of something that's a pre-established club or organization. For example, maybe they're the captain of the tennis team. And when I say it's the mid tier, not the top tier, a lot of students and families will say to me, well, how is that not the top form of leadership? And I say, well, because it's in a pre-established organization. There are many tennis teams across the country. And in addition to the fact there are many tennis teams, there are many tennis teams that have more than one captain, right? And colleges recognize that. There are certain versions of college applications now where the schools will say to you, like, do you have leadership experience? And you put down, yeah, I'm captain of the tennis team. And they will then follow that up with, is this leadership position shared among, individuals? And, you say yes or no, and then you say how many other people. So they do recognize that. It's absolutely a fantastic thing to have that, you're the captain of the tennis team on your resume. It shows your commitment. It shows how much your team values you. So it's absolutely something to include. But really the top form of leadership is when a student organizes or orchestrates something themselves. And that's where a leadership project comes in. So a leadership project is when a student sets up something, plans out something that really ties to their interests, whether it's an academic interest, extracurricular interest, it ties to their interest, and they are the one taking the lead. They are organizing it, and it's not something that's already existed. And the reason a leadership project is also a fantastic thing to work on is because colleges really care about quality over quantity as far as activities are concerned. They would much rather see a student deeply engage in a particular area of interest, maybe 1 or 2 activities that they do, maybe 3 total, in different areas over their time in high school, like really hone in on those and delve deep into them, than to spread themselves sort of too thin among 4 or 5 or 6 different activities that they're not really dedicated to. It's something admissions offices notice. Something that particularly happens is, you'll have a student who freshman year, maybe they don't engage in very much. They try a club and then they decide not to continue it. Might be the same sophomore year. And then all of a sudden, junior year, on their resume, on their activity grid, you see that they're in 5 clubs, right? Colleges and universities recognize that oftentimes what's happening there is like the college bell went off and it's like, oh yeah, I need to be involved. And they just, try to do a bunch of things. They would much rather see, like I said, quality over quantity. And leadership projects really show the quality piece, right? And the key about leadership project is finding something the student is really passionate about to work on, not just something to do. We really want to make sure it's something that ties to their profile. So I wanted to talk about a few examples of leadership projects because this is something that I work on with all of my students. There's a lot of different options here. Because like we had said previously, you can have leadership in a lot of different areas. So your leadership project can really be in a lot of different areas. So, you can conduct remote research with a professor. This is, I think, a fantastic thing to do right now. What I have noticed with my students who are currently needing to reach out to professors for one reason or another, professors seem to be much more available now than they are normally. I see my students getting much faster responses, probably because, like most of us, professors are home right now and don't have the same level of commitments. So they're able to more deeply engage with students. So if this is something a student is considering doing, I think this is a fantastic time to do it. And there is a little bit of a protocol you want to follow with reaching out to professors and making sure that you understand what they're working on, what they do, familiarize yourself first. but I think it's a great time to be able to do that. And there's lots of different professors and lots of different like fields and topics that students can reach out to. Another opportunity for a leadership project is to really create something. Students could create a website around a particular area of interest. So to give you an example, I have a student from a few years ago who did a leadership project around creating a website for teenagers discussing in a very open way, in a peer-to-peer manner, stress and anxiety associated with school. And he did a lot of research. He worked with his psychology teacher in school to check the website. He then had a few professionals in the field of psychology and psychiatry also check his work and make sure that it was sound. And then what he did is he reached out to local schools and talked to them about this website and resource that he had created. And many of them posted it on their school website as a resource for students. And then he also reached out to middle schools as well once he made a version that was appropriate for that age group. So that's one thing you can do. You can also, create your own podcast if you like talking about topics, like develop a theme, something you're passionate about, and share that with other people, particularly if your strength is public speaking. It's a great opportunity. You could also, like I said, you could really develop a portfolio around something, or potentially have a series of articles you write and get published. Showing publications on your resume is a fantastic way to show colleges and universities you're really deeply dedicated to something. You also have the opportunity to organize events. And at this time, there's definitely the opportunity to organize online events and to really have a lot of people engage with you and show up, because again, they're home. They're spending a lot more time on the internet than they are normally. So you can do a virtual fundraiser for something you feel really strongly about, or you could just raise awareness for a cause by having talks about that thing. You could do educational seminars to teach people. So to give you, a few examples connected to the concept of really having an event, I had a student 2 years ago who was in high school who was strongly interested in STEM, particularly biology and chemistry more than anything else. And he felt like there were not a lot of opportunities during the school year for students to really grow their skills in sort of biology and chemistry specifically outside of the classroom. He knew there were a lot of summer programs, and he had a lot of friends who did robotics team or math Olympiad or something like that, but not that really pertained as much to biology and chemistry. And he felt pretty strongly about that. So he created an organization where he recruited ambassadors, representatives from different high schools in the area, to all come together and virtually meet once a month to discuss what events they could plan for other high school students to really develop their skills in biology and chemistry and research. And then it was the jobs of those ambassadors to go back to their local school communities and promote the different events they were going to do. And that for him was really successful. That student wrote about that in one of his supplemental essays for the college that he is currently attending, that accepted him ED. And I know he was asked about it multiple times in interviews, and he was asked about it in preparation for a summer program where he submitted his resume. So these leadership projects really do stand out to other individuals who are looking at a student's, resume or background. Something else that I had a student do, thinking about a research project, although he didn't conduct it with a professor, he conducted it more on his own, that I thought was really interesting, is the student had someone close to them that was in an automobile accident a few years before the student was in high school. And that really deeply impacted the student. And the accident was partially due to a lack of clarity and in traffic signals and signing in the town that he lived in. He also had known that there had been a more recent occurrence in things associated with accidents in teenage drivers, because a lot of students were getting their license in the town he lived in. He had a pretty big high school. He felt pretty strongly about doing something about it. So what he decided to do was he did a lot of research on traffic and traffic patterns. He spent a lot of time at the town hall with the planning group learning. He then surveyed a lot of the local businesses, as well as student drivers, as well as driving school instructors, about what was going on in the town. He also then surveyed the members of the community, and he collected all of this data. And he took the data and he turned it into a proposal, making suggestions about changes he thought should happen in the town based on, traffic patterns, and there should be a stoplight here, there should be this here, and then he presented it to a committee. So, although he surveyed other people, he was really orchestrating it himself, right? So that's just another example. So there's lots of ways for students to engage in leadership projects, and it's absolutely something students can start, as early as 8th or 9th grade and carry out over a longer period of time, or really plan it and execute it over a shorter period of time as well. I do have students who are going into the summer before senior year who still do leadership projects. So on that note, I just like to mention that I have done leadership advising for students for quite a long period of time. I do it one-on-one. I've also done group workshops for it. So I'm really excited to offer a Cultivating Leadership workshop for students to develop their own leadership project with me in a 4-week live course. So it's going to be a small group of students that come in, and we meet 4 times for 2 hours each. And in these meetings, we're going to talk about how to develop a really tailored leadership project to the student. We're going to make sure that we create a very specific action plan for that student. I have a lot of experience in helping students orchestrate these projects and the hiccups and the things that can come up. So a really strong plan of action and proposal for how they're going to carry out their project. And then we're also going to have a discussion of, once they complete this project, how they're going to showcase the growth that they've had, the skills that they've learned, what they've done to colleges and universities, as well as anyone else in the community that they'd like to share it with, or, potentially for internships and jobs and things like that. And so we're going to be running that course starting May 17th, and I'd love to have anyone who's really interested join us. It's going to be for anyone that's currently in 8th grade all the way through anyone that's currently in 11th grade, and we're keeping the group really small. Something I wanted to do for anyone who was gracious enough to join me on the call tonight is that I am going to include a bonus for anyone that does sign up for this course this evening. In addition to getting the whole month of course time with us, I'm also going to include a 1-hour consultation that a student can use after they complete the course. That's going to be personalized with me to go over anything about their leadership project that they would like to, whether that's they want help in executing it, they want feedback on something that they did further, or if a student really feels rock solid after taking the course and they don't feel like they have any questions as far as their leadership project is concerned, they can use that 1 hour of time however they'd like. If they want me to look at an essay and review it, I can do that. If they want suggestions on schools, I will do that as well. If they want help brainstorming other ways to volunteer, absolutely. So they can use that 1 hour however they want. And so that's only going to apply to people who sign up for the course tonight, but I wanted to include it as a thank you for spending time with me today. So I just wanted to give you a few more opportunities that we have coming up. There is a lot that's changed about the college admissions process in the last few months, but definitely the last few years. It's something that I spend a significant amount of my time on, is learning about all the changes and staying up to date. This is a picture here from a college tour extravaganza I did earlier this year. So I visit many colleges and universities every single year to really stay on top of the most important information for students and to be interacting with admissions officers. And my feeling is all of this information that's coming out, parents and students shouldn't be expected to master all of that on their own. So I'm really trying to offer as many opportunities for people to learn about what's important in the college admissions process right now. So we have some upcoming workshops. One is admissions testing. I actually added this. A lot of people graciously submitted questions to me early for this webinar, so it would help me plan a little bit better. And there were a lot of questions about testing. I'll try to answer a few tonight, but I'm going to have an entire webinar about admissions testing on April 30th to dive more deeply into this with families and how things have changed right now, and just in general, what's important to know for admissions testing. And then I'm also going to hold a 1 hour talk just about why leadership matters and why it's important in the admissions process, and to get into that in a little more detail. The course starts on May 17th. And I'm also going to have 2 other workshops, one about the college application process that I host every year, which I've made changes to really account for the current situation. But this is fantastic, again, for anyone like in 8th all the way through 11th grade. You can really get some great information about it out of it. And then the other one that I'm going to have later next month is one called Sight Set on Science. And it's about, if you have an interest in STEM, how can you cultivate that interest over your time in high school? How can you grow that interest, and then how can you convey that to admissions offices? There are a lot of individuals interested in STEM these days, and again, how can you delve deeply, and how can you really convey that you have done so and that you have a passion when you apply to schools? And if you're interested in any of these, we have the link right at the bottom of the page as well for you to check out our upcoming events. So now I just wanted to give the briefest overview of what we offer. So I am the founder of Strategic Academic Success. We offer college counseling assistance one-on-one to students. We always work on leadership projects, as well as have STEM and pre-health advising, as that's a big part of my background for students. I used to work at Yale Medical School doing research. We have test prep for admissions tests and regular academic tutoring, as well as we have a sector of the company that's private school admissions, as well as graduate school advising. If you want to learn more about us, please feel free to check out our website, or like I said, go to the bit.ly link to check out our events. And I now wanted to take time to answer as many questions as I can for everyone. I know questions have been coming in throughout the presentation, but I like to hold them off until the very end. So I'm going to begin to work through these, as well as some of the questions that were submitted ahead of time. I will get to absolutely as many questions as I possibly can. I'm going to try to take the most on-topic ones first regarding this presentation, and then I will work through others. And there will be Q&As at the end of every other workshop that I mentioned in that list, so always feel free to come back to ask more questions.